Now the form lets the user enter a value and updates that cost based on the price and the quantity. And this works great as long as the user enters something we expect. What happens if they enter something like 3.5? It just computes it and says, fine, you can buy 3.5 adult tickets, but that actually doesn't make sense. We don't want to sell half tickets. Even different than that, what about if they enter a B? What we get is NaN. NaN stands for not a number. So it's our responsibility. Users don't always do as expected, so it's our responsibility as web programmers to handle these kind of issues. So let's start by figuring out how we handle if they enter a 3.5. Well, that's just going to compute. So one of the things that we can do is we can use a function parseInt. So if we do parseInt, and that's kind of like parsefloat, except it will return an integer instead of float. It takes a string and returns the integer version of that. And that way, if it gives it a 3.5, it will return a 3. And we won't have to worry about that 0.5. So quantity gets done that. Now we can ask the question. So this will handle the 3.5 one. So let's go ahead and test that. We simply refresh. We put 3.5 in here. And what do we get? We get the cost for 3 of them. But notice how quantity has not been updated. Let's go ahead and update quantity so the user can see what value we're using. So if we want to get this one, which is that final one, and we'll update it, not only the final cost, but let's go ahead and update the quantity to be what we want it to be as well. So we refresh. Now when the user enters 2.7, we update and it resets it to 2 and does the cost to $19.98. So this will handle it in the case that they enter decimal values. It resets the quantity and computes it correctly, what we expect. Okay? And it just is truncating whatever decimal values they enter. Now, how about handling if they enter a value, some sort of non-number, not a number? We need to handle that as well. So let's go ahead and update here. We can ask the question after we've parseInted it. We can say if it's not a number, and there's actually a function for that, for this value NaN. We can say, is this an NaN? And we're asking about the variable quantity. And if it is not a number, then we can say, oh, well, that's not a number. We want to set both quantity and cost. So let's do both quantity and cost to 0. So instead of what they are, let's just reset it to 0. Say if you enter a letter, we're just going to reset it to 0. Okay? So that will handle that. And if it's not a number, so now this will be in the else part, we can do those other things that we want to do. So we can change the price and the cost. So I can just move all of this inside that else statement. And that will only happen if it is a number. Okay, so let's see if we've got it fixed now. So we refresh and we put 5.1 and it computes it for 5 and tells the user that it's what it's doing. They enter a G. Oh, notice how if you put a 5G, it can handle that. So that parseInt will try to find any number that it can and use it. But if they just put a value like go, what happens? It resets it to 0. So that worked out well. That's what we want to do. We could change cost to 0.00. Now we'll have to put this in quotes, or it'll just reset it to 0. If it stays a number, it'll just make it 0 again. So we refresh and we put in something unexpected. And sure enough, it resets quantity 0 and cost to 0.00, just like we want.